Hey guys, and welcome to another Friday video. Today we're going back to 2008 and we're taking a look at a quad-core processor from AMD. It is the Phenom 9950 Black Edition. So in this video we will check out how this CPU performs in modern games and also a few benchmarks. We will also talk about platform compatibility. We have an AM2 mainboard here. We're using an RX 580 and also 8 GB of DDR2 memory. So the AMD Phenom X4 9950 Black Edition has 4 cores running at 2.6 GHz. We have 2 MB of level 2 and also 2 MB of level 3 cache. The CPU is built on a 65nm process. It launched in July of 2008. Back in the day, it was priced quite competitively at only $235. And if you're looking to buy one right now on AliExpress, you're looking at around $30 US, which is a pretty decent price for the top model of a certain CPU range. I had a look on Wikipedia and there seem to be 2 variants of this CPU, one with 125 and the other one with 140 watt TDP. Turns out I've got the more efficient one with 125 watts. So keep that in mind when looking at the temperatures and power consumption figures. In most of my videos, I usually run into an issue or 2, but usually they're easily resolved. But with this mainboard in particular, I had lots of issues and I had to do all sorts of things to get it up and running to show you some games in action. So this is an AM2 mainboard from ASUS and we have the model number A3N HT Deluxe. If it has a BIOS chip, we will flash it and you can go to the ASUS website, get version 3401. It was already on this mainboard, but I flashed it again just to be sure. The first issue was the PCI Express slot here doesn't seem to be working. I didn't get a signal, although the machine would post and I would hear the classic post beep. So easy fix, I just used the second slot here and that worked. The second issue was really weird and it had to do with the BIOS. After clearing the CMOS, as soon as I entered the BIOS and I made any changes whatsoever and saved those changes, the machine just wouldn't post anymore. So that was a fairly easy fix. I just cleared the CMOS again and just let the machine run without entering the BIOS a single time. Very unusual and probably a sign that this mainboard is on its last legs. This mainboard has chipsets from NVIDIA, and in a recent video I ran into 3 mainboards with NVIDIA chipsets and had all sorts of issues. And once again, the NVIDIA SATA controllers gave me a huge headache. They don't seem to be able to recognize SATA 3 storage devices, so I wasn't able to use a SSD at all. I then used an IDE to SATA adapter to configure the SSD through the IDE interface. And although Windows did pick it up, it didn't let me install Windows on that particular drive. So in the end, I had no choice and I ended up using a mechanical hard drive, which is very annoying because the performance is very limited. It takes ages to boot the machine and load the games, but I didn't find another way around the issue. I had a few PCI SATA controllers, but they were all too old for Windows 10 to recognize them. At the back of the mainboard we have a PS2. We got 4 USB 2 ports, digital out in optical and coaxial form, HDMI, VGA out, so this mainboard has integrated graphics. We have gigabit Ethernet. Unfortunately, this port did not work, so I had to use a USB wireless adapter instead. I believe this is eSATA, and here we have the audio ports. This mainboard uses DDR2 memory. It has 4 slots, so we're using 4 modules with 2 GB each. So this means we have dual channel memory for some decent memory bandwidth, and also 8 GB of RAM is enough to run most modern games. For graphics, we use a Radeon RX 580 with 8 GB of video RAM, and that was fully compatible with this mainboard. And also the performance is enough to test games at 1080p and not being bottlenecked. For cooling, we're using the near silent 125 watts AMD thermal solution. You can buy this on Amazon. It's basically the Rave cooler without the shroud and the RGB lights. And we're also using the IC graphite thermal pad. I've been using this since a few months now and has been working really well for my projects. Don't have to use any thermal paste, no cleaning necessary, and the performance of this cooling solution was perfectly fine to keep this CPU in check in regards to temperatures. We're using a Thermaltake 750 watt power supply and the power meter at the wall measuring the entire system, 194 watts running Cinebench R20. So let's have a look at some benchmarks. In CPU Z, we're getting 474 for the multi-core and 110 for the single core performance. Cinebench R15, 241. Cinebench R20, 468. In Skydiver, 11,649 with 3,392 physics. And in Firestrike, 7,394 with 3,527 for the physics score. And now it's time to have a look at some games. So firstly, this processor is quite old. It does not support the latest CPU instructions. That means some games will not even launch. Here we have Apex Legends. We're getting a message. Doesn't support SSSE 3. That means you cannot run this game on this CPU. Fortnite has the same issue, but this one just crashes, doesn't even give you a error message. So if you have this processor, it doesn't really give you a clue why this game might not even run. Let's start with a game that runs fairly decent on this old platform. We have Strange Brigade using the Vulkan API, and this game shows what is possible if you optimize your software. And even on this processor from 2008, we're getting, over 100 FPS and a fairly decent experience. So yeah, definitely the exception. Most of the modern games I tried will not run that smooth. A good example is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We can see the CPU cores are fully maxed out and it just runs out of resources. Performance is pretty bad. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider are probably games that will not run well on this platform. The older Tomb Raider, that game should be playable, however. So yeah, that just shows you the difference between games that are highly optimized and games that require more cores and also higher clock speed and basically high IPC. Just Cause 4 surprised me a little bit. Here we have all the details maxed out and yeah, we're getting around 30 FPS, a little bit more. That actually surprised me because this game uses a lot of physics stuff going on, which can really bog down the CPU. Now, fair enough, in the scene that I'm showing here, there's not much happening, but still I was positively surprised that this game does run with around 30 FPS. Far Cry 5, this is another game where you will see the CPU sitting at 100% usage. This is with high details at 1080p and a bad experience. So yeah, so games from Ubisoft, they're known to want a high clock speed and decent IPC. They run fine on Ryzen CPUs, but on Phenom and Phenom 2 even, they can struggle. So there wasn't much point in checking out more modern games because the performance is fairly limited. It's not a good experience. So I had to look at some older games. Let's have a look at Half-Life 2, 1080p, 4x anti-aliasing and 16x anisotropic filtering, and we're getting fairly decent performance. So this is a game you can play on a high refresh rate monitor, maybe put in an FPS cap or something like that. And Dirt 3, one of my favorite racing games, 1080p, ultra details, 4x anti-aliasing, and we're getting around 80 FPS. So that is also quite a bit lower than on some of the other systems that we checked out. Basically the clock speed is fairly low on this platform and also the IPC. So games that want a high clock speed, they will struggle a little bit on this platform and perform limited. And finally, does the AMD Phenom X4 9950 run Crysis? It definitely runs it. Here we're running at 1080p with very high details, but it's not a good experience. Now that shouldn't come as a surprise. If a CPU struggles with some of the previous games I mentioned, it will not even have a chance with Crysis. That game is really unoptimized and still to this day needs really high-end hardware to get decent performance. But at least it runs the game, so that's nice to see. But yeah, so I think it's time to wrap up this video. So guys, what do I think of this processor? Well, usually I try to find something positive, but with this CPU it's difficult. The main purpose I see for this processor is a collector's item. It is the fastest from the original AMD Phenom line of processors. It is the Black Edition version, which means it's fully unlocked. And the version that I have is also the lower TDP one with only 125 watts. So I really see this as a collector's item only. In terms of performance, it is very limited. It struggles with many modern titles. We don't have the latest CPU instructions. And even for old games, if you're building a Windows XP retro gaming platform, there are so many better alternatives out there. For example, Socket 775 with a fast Core 2 Duo or Core 2 Quad. They are offering way better performance, consuming less power, and the parts, mainboards and processors and RAM are readily available on the used market. So yes, you could use this as a daily driver if that's all you have. When I set up Windows 10, the performance wasn't too bad actually, going online, downloading all the games and the drivers. So that worked pretty smoothly, to be honest. Yes, the CPU was often at 100% load, but because it had 4 cores, it is fairly okay with modern tasks, so to speak. Gaming, not so much. So yeah, the other issue is the mainboard. Maybe that's part of the reason why my final recommendation is not that positive. That's more the fault of the mainboard and the NVIDIA chipset having issues with the SSD not being detected because it's SATA 3. That is very annoying. I wish I had a decent mainboard with an AMD chipset. I do have a few micro ADX boards with an AMD chipset, but they do not support this processor. They top out at supporting 95 watt TDP CPUs only. RAM is dirt cheap. DDR2 memory you can get in abundance, especially 1 GB and 2 GB modules. We have 4 memory slots, and with 8 GB of RAM, you can still run most modern games fairly comfortably, especially if you have a video card with more VRAM, like the Radeon RX 580 with 8 GB. Also very nice is the CPU cooler compatibility. This is a platform from 2008 and you can buy a cooler in 2020 and it will fit without any issues. So that's amazing, and thank you AMD for doing that. It just means I can use the AMD boxed cooler and use it with all my AMD projects. And guys, that's really it. I wish I could recommend this platform, but I can't. The performance is just not good enough, and there are heaps better options on the used market. Can be Socket 775, can be Socket 2011 or 1366. But even from AMD, Phenom 2 platform on AM3 Plus is heaps better. No issues with SATA 3 compatibility, DDR3 memory even, where you can get 16 gigs of RAM or even more. And yeah, the processors are also a lot more capable. Even 6-core CPUs are available. So guys, that was taking a look at the AMD Phenom X4 9950. Let me know, what do you think? Did you have such a CPU back in the day, or did you go with the Core 2 Quad platform instead? Or did you hang on to your Athlon 64 or Athlon 64 X2 and waited for the Phenom 2 range of CPUs to come out? Share your story. I read every single comment. You might not get a reply, but I do read every comment. And that's it for this video. If you found it interesting, give it a like, share the video with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I shall see you soon with another one.